Have you ever had that moment in life when you discovered something you weren't supposed to discover? That kind of secret that changes everything, that makes you question whether you really know the people around you. Imagine working every day for someone, trusting that person to support your family, and suddenly discovering that they hide something so dark it could destroy entire lives. That's exactly what happened to an ordinary woman who thought she was living a simple and predictable life, until fate placed in her hands information she should never have found. What would you do if you were in her place? This is the story of Olivia, a housekeeper who had worked for 5 years in the mansion of one of the richest and most respected men in the city. For her, that job represented stability, a way to support her 2 children alone and keep the family together. She never questioned anything, never meddled where she wasn't called, always did her work in silence and went home. She was the type of employee every boss wants to have: discreet, efficient, and invisible. But sometimes being invisible means being in the right place at the wrong time, means seeing things that shouldn't be seen, means discovering truths that some people would kill to keep secret. What Olivia didn't know is that her life was about to turn upside down in a way she could never imagine. Behind the luxurious walls of that mansion, behind the confident smile and impeccable reputation of her boss, there was something much more sinister than she ever suspected. It was like living on top of a dormant volcano, not knowing that at any moment everything could explode. And when the truth finally came to light, she found herself facing the most impossible dilemma a person can face. A dilemma that would test not only her courage, but her very soul. Prepare yourself for a journey that will show how an accidental discovery can trigger a series of events that no one could predict. A story that proves that sometimes the most unlikely people are chosen by destiny to make a difference in the world. A narrative that will make you question what you really know about the people around you and what you would be capable of doing when confronted with the most dangerous truth of your life. Because when the darkest secrets finally come to light, they have the power to transform not just one life, but an entire society. You know that feeling that something isn't right, but you can't put your finger on it? That was exactly what Olivia felt every day when entering that imposing mansion in the city's most noble neighborhood. For 5 years, she had been waking up at 5 in the morning, taking 2 buses and arriving punctually at 7 to begin her housekeeper routine at businessman Robert Mason's house. For her, that job wasn't just work. It was the only way to keep her family together and put food on the table for the 2 children she was raising alone. The salary wasn't the best, but at least it was guaranteed, and in a time when unemployment was knocking on so many people's doors, she considered herself lucky. Olivia had always been one of those people who don't complain about life, one of those who face challenges with their heads held high and do what needs to be done. But even with all that willpower, she couldn't ignore the strange sensation that took hold of her whenever she stepped into that house. It was as if the walls whispered secrets she shouldn't hear. What Olivia didn't imagine is that behind those Italian marble walls and expensive paintings, there was a secret much darker than she could imagine. Robert Mason was known in the city as a successful businessman, owner of a true business empire that ranged from construction companies to technology firms. People saw him as an example of determination and business intelligence, always impeccably dressed and with that confident smile of someone who never knew the word no. He was the type of man who appeared on magazine covers, gave lectures on entrepreneurship, and was invited to dinners with important politicians. In the city, the Mason name was synonymous with power and prestige, and anyone would feel honored to work for him. But Olivia, who spent hours cleaning every corner of that house, began to notice details that didn't match her boss's public image. There was something strange in the air, a tension she couldn't explain, as if the entire house kept a dilemma that no one dared mention. During those 5 years, she had always been discreet and efficient, exactly as a good employee should be. She would arrive, do her work in silence, and leave, without asking questions or meddling where she wasn't called. After all, who was she to question the habits of such a powerful man? Olivia had learned early on that simple people like her shouldn't interfere in the affairs of the rich. It was better to keep her head down, do the job right, and go home to take care of her own family. That had always been her golden rule. Work is work, and personal life is personal life. But in recent months, small signs began to catch her attention in a way she could no longer ignore. It was as if the universe was trying to show her something important, but she still didn't know exactly what. The first strange things she noticed were the whispered meetings that stopped abruptly when she entered to clean. Just imagine the scene. She would arrive with the vacuum cleaner, and suddenly a sepulchral silence would take over the environment. The men in suits who had been talking animatedly seconds before would fall silent, looking at her as if she were a ghost that appeared out of nowhere. Robert always gave that forced smile and said, "Ah, Olivia, you can clean later, please." But his tone of voice was different, tense, almost irritated. She perceived that she wasn't welcome in those moments, but didn't understand why. After all, she was just a housekeeper doing her job, not a spy trying to discover business secrets. But the feeling that something important was being hidden from her and from everyone anyone, only grew each day. It was as if she were living in a theater play where everyone knew the script, except her. Another detail that began to bother Olivia were the documents being burned in the fireplace, even in the scorching summer heat. Who burns paper when it's 40 degrees outside? That made no sense at all. She would arrive in the morning and find still warm ashes in the fireplace, with a strange smell in the air that wasn't just from burned wood. Once, she even asked Robert if he wanted her to clean the fireplace, and he responded so brusquely that she was startled. "You don't need to worry about that, Olivia. I'll take care of it myself," he said, with a voice that admitted no questioning. From that day on, she began to notice more details. Whenever there were important meetings, the next day the fireplace was full of ashes. It was as if after each meeting, something needed to be destroyed, erased from the face of the earth, and that wasn't normal. Definitely not normal. The tense phone calls were another sign that something was out of place in that apparently perfect empire. Olivia heard Robert talking on the phone with a voice she had never heard before, a voice full of anger, fear, and desperation. He would shout things like, "This can't leak, and you know very well what's at stake here," before hitting his fist on the table with such force that objects would tremble. After these phone calls, he would pace around the house like a caged lion, nervous and irritable with any little thing. Olivia, who had always been observant by nature, began to connect the dots. The secret meetings, the burned documents, the tense phone calls, all of this pointed to a single conclusion. There was something very serious happening there, something that Robert Mason would do anything to keep secret, and she, unwittingly, was right in the middle of it all, even without yet understanding the true dimension of what she was about to discover. It was as if the entire house breathed an air of constant nervousness, and Olivia, even trying to remain invisible, couldn't help but notice that something very serious was happening inside there. The tension was so palpable that she could feel it in the air, like when a storm is forming and lightning will strike, you just don't know where or when. She tried to concentrate on work, dusting the furniture, vacuuming the expensive carpets, organizing the decorative objects, but her mind couldn't stop processing all those strange signs. It was as if each passing day, more pieces of a mysterious puzzle were appearing in front of her, and the worst part was that she had the feeling that soon, all these pieces would fit together in a way that would change her life forever. Because sometimes life has a very peculiar way of putting the right people in the right place, at the right time, so that justice can be done, even when those people have no idea of the role they're about to play in this whole story. Have you ever had one of those moments in life when everything changes in a matter of seconds? That's exactly what happened to Olivia on an ordinary Tuesday when she was cleaning Robert's office. She was dusting behind the bookshelf. You know how it is, those little corners that no one sees but that accumulate dust anyway, when her hand bumped into something that shouldn't be there. It was a brown leather folder, somewhat crumpled, hidden between the wall and the furniture as if someone had tried to get rid of it hastily. At first, Olivia thought about simply putting the folder back in place and pretending she hadn't seen anything. After all, messing with her boss's things wasn't exactly part of her job description, but something inside her, perhaps the natural curiosity of someone who had always paid attention to details, made her hesitate for a moment. It was as if fate had placed that folder in her path for some specific reason. When Olivia opened the folder, her world turned upside down. These weren't ordinary company documents, they weren't normal business contracts. It was something much more serious and frightening than she could ever imagine. There were falsified contracts with signatures that clearly didn't match the originals, bank transfer receipts to offshore accounts with amounts that made her eyes widen, and worst of all, clear evidence of a corruption scheme involving politicians, judges, and businessmen from the city. It was as if she had found the treasure map, except instead of gold, she had discovered an empire built on lies and crimes. Each page she turned revealed more details of how Robert Mason had built his fortune: bribes to secure public tenders, money laundering through shell companies, and illegal payments to ensure that certain investigations never went anywhere. Olivia's heart was beating so hard that she was sure someone could hear it from far away. Her first reaction was pure panic. Her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold the papers. It was as if a time bomb had been placed in her hands, and she had no idea how to defuse the situation. Olivia looked around the office, checking if there was no one nearby, and quickly tucked the folder under her arm. She knew she couldn't leave it there. If Robert discovered that someone had found these documents, the consequences could be terrible. But at the same time, she also knew she couldn't simply ignore what she had seen. These were evidence of crimes that affected the lives of thousands of people, working families like hers who were being harmed by this corruption scheme. The dilemma was gigantic. Pretend nothing had happened or take responsibility for doing something with that information. It was the type of decision that changes the course of an entire life, and she knew it. During the rest of the day, Olivia could barely concentrate on work. Every noise in the house made her jump with fright. Every time Robert appeared, she felt as if he could read her thoughts. The folder was hidden in her bag, but it seemed to weigh a ton. It was like carrying a secret that burned inside, knowledge that she hadn't asked to have, but that was now hers. She tried to act normally, greet Robert with the same good morning as always, do the cleaning with the same efficiency as always, but inside there was a real hurricane of emotions. Fear, indignation, confusion, all mixed in a sensation she had never experienced before. It was as if she had discovered that the world wasn't exactly as she thought it was, that behind the facade of respectability there was a dark side she had never imagined. When she got home that night, Olivia locked the door, closed the curtains, and spread all the documents on the kitchen table. Under the yellowish light of the lamp, she began to understand the true dimension of what she had in her hands. These weren't just some suspicious contract. It was a complete corruption scheme that involved everyone from small public officials to high-ranking politicians. There were detailed spreadsheets showing how money circulated, photographs of secret meetings, and even recordings of compromising conversations. It was as if Robert had meticulously documented every crime he committed, perhaps as a way to protect himself in case something went wrong. Olivia realized she was facing information that could bring down not only Robert, but an entire corruption system that had been operating for years in the city. And she, a simple housekeeper who just wanted to support her family in peace, was now at the center of it all. The night was long and sleepless for Olivia. She stayed there, at the kitchen table, reading and rereading each document, trying to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. It was as if each page revealed a new layer of lies and crimes, an entire empire built on corruption and disrespect for laws. She thought about her own family, about her children sleeping in the next room, and wondered what kind of world she wanted to leave for them. A world where people like Robert Mason could do whatever they wanted without consequences, or a world where justice really existed. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but at the same time, she felt a strength growing inside her, the strength of someone who knows they have the opportunity to make a difference. It was as if fate had placed those documents in her path for a very specific reason, and now it was up to her to decide what to do with that opportunity. When the sun began to rise, Olivia had already made a decision. She couldn't simply pretend nothing had happened. That would be like being an accomplice to all those crimes. But she also knew she couldn't act impulsively, that she needed to think very carefully about the next steps. After all, she was dealing with powerful people, people who wouldn't hesitate to do anything to protect their secrets. It was as if she was about to enter a war where the weapons were information, and she had just found the most powerful ammunition of all. If you also believe that the most dangerous secrets always find a way to come to light, and that sometimes it's the most unlikely people who make a difference in the world, then you'll understand why this discovery was just the beginning of a journey that would change not only Olivia's life, but that of the entire city. Because when the truth finally comes to light, it has the power to transform everything, and not always in the way we expect. In the days that followed the discovery, Olivia transformed into a true amateur detective. Every night, after the children slept, she would sit at the kitchen table with those documents spread in front of her, trying to decipher every detail of the corruption scheme she had in her hands. It was like assembling a gigantic puzzle, where each piece revealed a new facet of Robert Mason's criminal empire. She discovered that the frauds weren't recent. On the contrary, they had been happening for more than a decade, growing and becoming more sophisticated over time. What began as small bribes to speed up bureaucratic processes had transformed into a true money laundering machine that moved millions of dollars every month. Olivia was impressed by the complexity of the scheme. Shell companies created only to mask illegal transfers, overpriced contracts that diverted public funds, and a network of complicity that involved everyone from small officials to major authorities. It was as if she had discovered a parallel city where normal rules didn't apply and where money bought anything, including justice. The more she studied those documents, the more she understood the true magnitude of what she was facing. It wasn't just an isolated case of corruption. It was an entire system built to benefit the powerful at the expense of the weakest. Olivia discovered that many of the city's public works, from hospitals to schools, had been overpriced to generate illegal profits for Robert and his accomplices. The money that should have been used to improve people's lives was being diverted to bank accounts abroad, while ordinary people, like her and her family, continued suffering with low-quality public services. It was revolting to realize that while she struggled every month to pay bills and give her children a decent life, people like Robert were stealing money that could make a difference in the lives of thousands of working families. The feeling of injustice growing inside her was almost unbearable, like a wound that wouldn't stop hurting. She began to understand that those documents weren't just papers. They were evidence of crimes that directly affected the lives of people like her, and that made everything much more personal. Fear, however, also began to take hold of Olivia in a way she had never experienced before. It was a different fear from what we feel feel when watching a horror movie. It was the real fear of someone who knows they're dealing with dangerous people, people who wouldn't hesitate to do anything to protect their secrets. She began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. Strange cars parked on her street, people who seemed to be watching her house, silent phone calls that came at odd hours. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was intuition, but Olivia felt that her life was changing in an irreversible way. During work at the mansion, she noticed that Robert was watching her more closely, as if trying to detect some change in her behavior. He asked apparently innocent questions about her routine, about where she kept cleaning materials, about which rooms she cleaned first. It was as if he was investigating his own employee, trying to discover if she knew something. The climate of tension in the house had intensified even more, and Olivia felt she was walking on a tightrope, where one false step could mean the end of everything. The psychological pressure of carrying that secret began to affect all aspects of Olivia's life. She could barely sleep at night, always with one ear alert to any strange noise that might indicate danger. During the day at work, she felt like an actress playing a role, trying to act normally while inside there was a real whirlwind of emotions. Her children began to notice that something was different with their mother, that she was more nervous and distracted than normal. How to explain to two children that mommy had discovered something that could put the whole family in danger? How to say that the job that supported the house was now threatened because of a discovery she hadn't asked to make? The dilemma was cruel. Protecting the family meant keeping the secret, but keeping the secret meant being an accomplice to crimes that harmed thousands of other families. It was like being trapped in a trap with no way out, where any decision would bring painful consequences. Olivia felt alone in the world, carrying a burden that was too heavy for one person alone. But it was precisely in that moment of greatest despair that something inside Olivia began to change. The indignation she felt when reading about the crimes committed by Robert began to overcome the fear that paralyzed her. She thought about the other working families in the city, about the children who studied in poorly equipped schools because education money was being stolen, about the sick who suffered in rundown hospitals because health resources were being diverted. It was as if she finally understood that she wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting for all the people who, like her, were victims of that corrupt system. The anger she felt was a just anger, an anger that came from the depths of the heart of someone who had always worked honestly and saw others prospering through dishonest means. Olivia began to realize that she had something very powerful in her hands, the truth, and the truth, however dangerous it might be, had the power to bring justice. It was as if she had found a weapon capable of bringing down giants, and now she needed to decide if she had enough courage to use it. Olivia's transformation from victim to protagonist didn't happen overnight, but was gradual and profound. She began to research her rights, about laws protecting whistleblowers, about organizations that fought against corruption. It was as if she was preparing for battle, gathering information and planning strategies. She discovered she wasn't alone. There were other people in the city who suspected irregularities, investigative journalists who sought evidence, prosecutors who tried to build cases against corruption schemes. The problem had always been the lack of concrete evidence, and now she had exactly that in her hands. It was as if all the puzzle pieces were finally fitting together, showing a possible path for justice to be done. Olivia realized that her discovery hadn't been an accident. Perhaps it was destiny putting the right person in the right place at the right time to make a difference. And this realization gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. When Olivia finally made the decision to act, she knew there was no turning back. It was like crossing a bridge that collapses right after you pass. You can't go back. You can only move forward. She understood that silence, which before seemed to be the safest option, was actually the most dangerous option of all. Dangerous for her conscience, dangerous for her family, dangerous for all of society. Because when good people remain silent in the face of injustice, they allow evil to continue growing and spreading. Olivia didn't want her children to grow up in a world where corruption was accepted as normal, where the powerful could do whatever they wanted without consequences. She wanted to leave them a legacy of courage and honesty, even if that meant facing enormous risks. It was as if she had finally understood that some battles are worth fighting, even when the chances of victory seem small. And with this understanding, she prepared to take the next step, a step that would change not only her life, but potentially the life of the entire city. Olivia's world completely collapsed when she realized that Robert began to suspect that someone had tampered with his files. It was on a Thursday morning that she noticed the first change in his behavior. He was more attentive, more observant, asking questions he had never asked before. "Olivia, have you been cleaning the office properly? Haven't you noticed anything out of place there?" The question came accompanied by a penetrating look she had never seen before, a look that seemed to try to read her thoughts. She responded with the naturalness she could muster, but inside her heart raced like an unregulated engine. It was as if he knew something was wrong, but still wasn't sure what. In the following days, Robert began appearing in the office at unusual hours, always with the excuse that he had forgotten something important. Olivia perceived that he was checking if everything was in place, looking for signs that someone had violated his sanctuary of secrets. The tension in the air was so dense that she could feel it physically, like a storm that's about to explode. Robert's paranoia intensified when he discovered that some documents were missing, exactly those that Olivia had taken home. She saw when he opened the file where the folder should be and found only empty space. The expression on his face changed completely, going from suspicion to pure panic. It was like watching a man realizing that his empire was about to crumble. He began to ransack the entire office, desperately searching for the lost documents, murmuring words that Olivia couldn't understand completely, but that sounded like threats. "Who came in here? Who had access to this information?" he shouted to himself like a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Olivia tried to continue her cleaning normally, but her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold objects. It was like being in the eye of the hurricane, knowing that at any moment the storm could turn against her. The dilemma she faced now was no longer just moral, it was a matter of survival. It was at this moment that Olivia realized she was being watched, and the fear she felt transformed into pure terror. She began to notice strange cars parked on her street, always with people inside who seemed to be observing her house. When she left for work or to take the children to school, she had the constant sensation of being followed. These were small details, but together they formed a frightening pattern. The same car appearing in different places, faces she saw repeatedly in places where they shouldn't be, silent phone calls that came at strange hours. It was like living in a suspense movie, except this time it was real, and she was the protagonist. The worst part was knowing that her children were also potentially in danger. She looked at them playing innocently in the living room and felt her heart break, thinking that her discovery could put these two children at risk. It was a dilemma too cruel for any mother to face. How to protect the family when you've discovered something that powerful people would do anything to keep secret. The weight of the decision Olivia faced was simply overwhelming. On one side, there was her family's safety, the job that supported the house, the quiet life they led, the protection that came from not getting into trouble with powerful people. On the other side, there was justice, the opportunity to expose crimes that harmed thousands of people, the chance to make a difference in the world, the moral responsibility not to be an accomplice to evil. It was like being on a scale where any choice would bring painful consequences. If she denounced Robert, she would lose her job immediately and become a target for people who wouldn't hesitate to harm her and the children. But if she remained silent, it would be like accepting that corruption continued destroying the lives of working families like hers. It was the type of dilemma that has no right answer, where any decision requires enormous sacrifices. Olivia spent entire nights awake, looking at the ceiling and trying to find a third option that didn't exist. It was like being trapped in a trap where all exits led to suffering. The psychological pressure intensified when Robert began making veiled threats during work. He didn't say anything directly, but his words carried a threatening subtext that chilled Olivia's blood. "You know, Olivia, I've always valued loyal employees, people who know how to keep their mouths shut about matters that aren't their business. Or, it's a shame when good people get into trouble because of excessive curiosity. Sometimes knowing too much can be very dangerous." He said these things with a smile on his face, but his eyes were cold as ice. It was like receiving a direct message that he knew that she knew, and that the consequences of any action would be severe. Olivia felt she was walking on a tightrope over an abyss where one false move would mean the fall. The fear she felt wasn't just for herself, it was mainly for the children, who depended on her for everything and who weren't to blame for being in this situation. It was like carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, knowing that any decision would affect not only her life, but the lives of the people she loved most in the world. During this period of terror and uncertainty, Olivia found herself forced to take precautions she never imagined she would need to take. She changed her daily routine, varying the times and routes she took, always alert to signs that she was being followed. She began leaving the children at the neighbor's house instead of taking them to school personally, inventing excuses not to expose them to possible dangers. It was like living in an invisible prison, where every movement needed to be calculated and every decision carried risks. She hid copies of the documents in different places, fearing that her house could be invaded at any moment. Sleep became a rare luxury as she spent nights awake, listening to every street noise, every creak of the house, every sound that might indicate danger. It was a way of living that no human being should have to endure, but which became her reality after discovering the truth about Robert's corruption empire. The irony was cruel. She had found evidence that could bring justice to thousands of people, but using that evidence could destroy her own family. It was in this moment of greatest despair that Olivia realized she could no longer delay the decision. The dilemma that had tormented her for weeks needed to be resolved, because the uncertainty was destroying her mental sanity and affecting her children. children, who began to notice that something was very wrong with their mother. It was like reaching a crossroads where you need to choose a path, knowing you can't turn back afterward. She looked at the documents spread on the kitchen table, then looked at the photo of the children on the wall, and finally understood that the real question wasn't whether she had the courage to denounce Robert. The real question was whether she had the courage not to denounce him. Because remaining silent would mean teaching the children that it's acceptable to be an accomplice to injustice when it's convenient, that it's normal to close your eyes to others' suffering when your own safety is at stake. And that wasn't the lesson she wanted to leave as a legacy. It was as if she finally understood that some battles need to be fought, not because we're sure we're going to win, but because not fighting would be a betrayal of our own values and the memory of all the people who suffered because of the corruption she now had the power to expose. When Olivia finally gathered courage to take the first step toward justice, she decided to seek out an investigative journalist she had seen in a corruption report on television. It was a man named David Garcia, known for his courageous investigations and for not being afraid to face powerful people. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe in the city center, away from the curious eyes she constantly felt upon her. Olivia arrived nervous, with a folder containing copies of some of the most compromising documents she had found. When she showed the evidence to David, she saw his eyes widen with surprise, and then shine with the excitement of someone who had just found the holy grail of investigative journalism. "This here is pure dynamite," he said, leafing through the papers with reverent care. "If we can verify the authenticity of all this, we have enough material to bring down not only Robert Mason, but an entire corruption network that has been operating for years in the city." It was as if Olivia had just handed over the key that would open all the doors that investigative journalism had been trying to open for so long. But she still didn't imagine that this would be just the first of many surprising reactions that were to come. News of the denunciation spread faster than Olivia expected, and the first reactions came from her own neighbors, people she had known for years and who had always treated her with affection and respect. To her surprise and disappointment, many of them didn't react with the support she expected. Mrs. Maria, the neighbor of more than 20 years, was one of the first to confront her. "Olivia, what's this story about you causing problems for your boss? The man gave you a job for 5 years and now you're going to bite the hand that feeds you?" It was like receiving a slap in the face from someone you considered a friend. Other neighbors whispered when she passed, making comments that reached her ears like stabs. "I always knew that woman was problematic. Who does she think she is to mess with important people? Maybe she was the one stealing and now wants to blame the boss." It was devastating to realize that people she considered close were more concerned with maintaining the status quo than supporting someone who was trying to do the right thing. It was like discovering that the world wasn't as black and white as she imagined, that even among the oppressed there were those who preferred to accept oppression rather than fight against it. But not all reactions were negative, and some of the most surprising came from people Olivia would never expect to support her. Mr. Joaquim, the owner of the bakery where she bought bread every day, pulled her aside one morning and said quietly, "Olivia, I don't know exactly what you discovered, but I know you're an honest woman. If you're denouncing someone, it's because you have more than enough reason. You can count on me for whatever you need." It was like finding an oasis in the middle of the desert, an unexpected relief amid so much judgment. Her children's teacher also approached her discreetly. "Mrs. Olivia, I've worked in education for 15 years and I know how corruption affects our schools. If you're fighting against this, know that you have my total support." These demonstrations of solidarity came from simple people, workers like her, who understood firsthand how corruption harmed their daily lives. It was like discovering that there was a silent network of honest people who were waiting for someone to have the courage to take the first step. These voices of support, even though whispered, gave Olivia the strength she needed to continue fighting. The most painful and unexpected reaction came from her ex-husband, Paulo, who saw in the situation an opportunity to try to take custody of the children. He appeared at her door one afternoon with a malicious smile she knew all too well. "Olivia, have you completely lost your mind? You're putting our children in danger because of this obsession with justice. Maybe it would be better if they stayed with me until you resolve this whole mess." It was as if he had punched her in the stomach. Paulo had never shown much interest in the children after the divorce, visited them sporadically and rarely paid child support on time. But now, seeing an opportunity to use the situation against her, he was trying to pass himself off as a concerned father. The dilemma this created was devastating for Olivia. She was fighting for justice precisely to leave a better world for the children, but this fight was being used as an argument to take them away from her. It was a cruel irony that made her question whether she had made the right decision. For nights on end, she stayed awake imagining terrible scenarios where she would lose custody of the children for trying to do the right thing. It was like being trapped in a trap, where every movement to free herself herself only tightened the ropes more, but it was precisely when everything seemed lost that a guardian angel appeared in the form of a lawyer named Charlotte Smith. She had read about the case in the newspapers and offered to defend Olivia for free. "Mrs. Olivia, I've worked with human rights for 15 years, and cases like yours are exactly why I chose this profession. You're not alone in this fight." It was as if the universe had sent help exactly when she needed it most. Charlotte not only helped her defend against her ex-husband's attempts to take custody of the children, but also guided her about her rights as a whistleblower and about available legal protections. She explained that there were specific laws to protect people who denounce corruption, and that Olivia had the right to police protection if necessary. It was like discovering that there was an entire support system she didn't know existed, people dedicated to protecting those who have the courage to fight against injustice. The lawyer's presence brought not only legal security, but also a sense of legitimacy to her cause. She was no longer alone against the world, she had someone qualified by her side. The domino effect of reactions continued spreading in ways Olivia could never have predicted. Other people who worked for Robert or who had business with him began approaching her discreetly, some to offer support, others to try to intimidate her. One of Robert's company secretaries called her in the early morning. "Mrs. Olivia, I can't say much, but I want you to know that there are more people who know about the wrong things that happen here. You were brave to denounce, and that gave hope to those who were afraid to speak." It was like discovering that there were other people who also carried heavy secrets, but who hadn't had the courage to act. On the other hand, she also received threatening calls from people who identified themselves as Robert's friends. "It would be better for you and your family if you stopped this nonsense and disappeared from the city." These threats were terrifying, but at the same time confirmed that she had hit the target. If they were trying to intimidate her, it was because her denunciation was causing the impact she expected. It was like being in the center of a storm, where contrary winds blew from all directions, but she knew she needed to stay firm in the eye of the hurricane. The most surprising revelation of all came when Olivia discovered she wasn't alone in her fight. There were other victims of Robert's corruption scheme who were waiting for exactly an opportunity like this to manifest themselves. A businessman who had lost a public tender suspiciously sought out journalist David Garcia after learning about Olivia's denunciation. A public official who had been pressured to facilitate illegal contracts decided to break his silence. An accountant who had been forced to falsify documents finally found courage to tell her story. It was as if Olivia's courage had created a chain reaction, inspiring other people to come out of the shadows and join the fight for justice. Each new voice that joined the chorus of denunciations strengthened the case and diminished the intimidation power of Robert and his accomplices. It was proof that when one person has the courage to take the first step, they can inspire many others to follow the same path. And that's how Olivia realized that her decision to fight for justice had triggered something much bigger than she imagined. A movement of ordinary people who were tired of accepting corruption as something normal and who had finally found a way to fight against it. When David Garcia's investigative report was finally published, the impact was like a bomb exploding in the middle of the city. The headlines stamped the front pages of newspapers. "Billion-dollar corruption scheme exposed by courageous housekeeper." Within hours, the story spread through all media outlets, from local radios to national television channels. The evidence Olivia had found was so compelling and detailed that it left no room for doubt. Robert Mason and his network of complicity had been caught red-handed. The documents clearly showed how millions of dollars in public funds had been diverted over the years, how tenders had been rigged, and how politicians and public officials had been bought to facilitate the crimes. It was like watching a house of cards collapsing. Each new revelation brought down another piece of the corruption empire that seemed so solid before. Robert, who had always carried himself as an untouchable man, suddenly found himself exposed and vulnerable before all of society. Justice, which for so long seemed blind to the crimes of the powerful, was finally opening its eyes. Robert's arrest happened on a Friday morning, and Olivia watched on television when he was led away in handcuffs by federal police officers. It was a scene she never imagined she would see. The man she had served silently for 5 years, who had intimidated and threatened her, was now being treated as the criminal he really was. But along with the feeling of justice being done, there also came a wave of threats and pressures that Olivia wasn't prepared to face. In the first days after the arrest, she received anonymous calls at all hours. Strange cars returned to circulate on her street, and threatening messages were even left at her door. It was as if the other pieces of the corruption scheme were trying to take revenge on her for bringing down their leader. Fear returned with full force, and Olivia found herself questioning whether she had made the right decision. There were moments when she looked at the children and wondered if it wouldn't have been better to keep the secret to protect them. It was the cruel price that those who fight for justice sometimes have to pay. Even doing the right thing, the consequences can be painful and frightening. But it was precisely in the most difficult moments that Olivia discovered the true strength that existed within in her. The threats, instead of intimidating her completely, awakened a determination she didn't know she possessed. It was as if each attempt to silence her only confirmed that she had made the right choice. With the support of Charlotte and journalist David, she decided not to hide. On the contrary, she began giving interviews and telling her story publicly. "I will not be silenced," she said, in an interview that went viral on social media. "If they want to intimidate me, it's because they know the truth hurts, and I will continue speaking the truth until all the guilty are punished." It was impressive to see how a simple woman, who had always lived in invisibility, had transformed into a powerful voice against corruption. Her words touched the hearts of ordinary people who identified with her struggle and were inspired by her courage. It was as if she had become a symbol that any person, no matter how humble their origin, can make a difference in the world when they have the courage to fight for what is right. The popular support Olivia received was something that surprised even the most experienced observers. Spontaneous demonstrations began happening in front of the courthouse where Robert was being tried, with people carrying signs that said, "Thank you, Olivia," and "Courage has no social class." Donations began arriving from anonymous people who wanted to help with legal expenses and ensure she could continue her fight without worrying about financial issues. It was as if the entire city had awakened to the reality of corruption that surrounded them and had finally found a heroine to mirror themselves in. Other victims of Robert's scheme began manifesting publicly, creating a movement that went far beyond the original case. It was like an avalanche of truths that had been triggered by one person's courage. Olivia realized that her fight had become something much bigger than she imagined. It was no longer just about punishing Robert, but about transforming how society dealt with corruption. It was about showing that ordinary people have the power to bring down empires built on lies and crimes. The most unexpected turnaround came when other authorities, inspired by Olivia's case, began investigating similar schemes in other cities and states. It was as if her denunciation had opened Pandora's box, revealing that the corruption problem was much broader than anyone imagined. Politicians who thought themselves untouchable began being investigated. Businessmen who thought they were above the law saw their empires crumbling, and corrupt public officials were exposed and punished. The case that began with a housekeeper finding forgotten documents had transformed into a national anti-corruption operation. It was proof that when justice is finally done, it has a multiplying effect that can transform an entire society. Olivia became not just a whistleblower, but a symbol of hope for millions of people who had lost faith in the possibility of change. It was as if she had lit a flame that spread throughout the country, illuminating dark corners where corruption was hiding. The months that followed brought profound changes not only for Robert and his accomplices, but for the entire power structure of the city. New politicians were elected with anti-corruption platforms, stricter laws were approved to protect whistleblowers, and transparency systems were implemented to make schemes like the one Olivia had exposed more difficult. It was like watching a city being reborn, freeing itself from the chains of corruption that had suffocated it for so long. The money that had been stolen began being recovered and directed to where it should always have gone: hospitals, schools, infrastructure that directly benefited the population. It was the materialization of the justice Olivia had dreamed of when she decided to denounce the crimes she discovered. She saw children studying in schools renovated with recovered money, patients being treated in hospitals with new equipment, and knew her fight had been worth it. It was like seeing the fruits of a tree she had planted with her own hands, watered with her courage and determination. In the end, when the entire judicial process came to an end, and Robert was sentenced to decades in prison, Olivia received not only the compensation owed to her as a whistleblower, but something much more valuable: the recognition that she had made a difference in the world. She got a job at an NGO that fights corruption, where her experience and credibility made her a respected voice in the fight for transparency and justice. It was as if her entire journey had been preparation for this moment, where she could use her story to inspire other people to have the courage to denounce irregularities. Her children, who initially suffered from the consequences of their mother's decision, now saw her with pride and admiration. They understood they had a special mother, a woman who had chosen to do what was right even when it meant facing great risks. It was the most precious legacy she could leave them, the lesson that courage and honesty are always worth it, even when the path is difficult. And so, a humble housekeeper who one day found forgotten documents in a mansion became living proof that justice, even if it takes time, always finds its way when there are courageous people willing to fight for it. Olivia's story teaches us a powerful lesson about courage and determination. She proves that it doesn't matter how simple your origin or how powerful your adversaries. When you have truth on your side and courage in your heart, it's possible to move mountains. A humble housekeeper managed to bring down a corruption empire that seemed untouchable, showing that justice isn't a privilege of the rich and powerful, but a right of all those who have the courage to fight for it. Her journey reminds us that each of us has the power to make a difference in the world, even when circumstances seem impossible. What's most impressive impressive about Olivia's trajectory is how she transformed her greatest fear into her greatest strength. The dilemma that almost destroyed her, choosing between protecting her family and seeking justice, ended up becoming the key to protecting not only her own children, but thousands of other families who were being harmed by corruption. She discovered that sometimes, to really protect those we love, we need to have the courage to face the dangers that threaten all of society. Her story is a reminder that true security doesn't come from hiding from problems, but from having the courage to solve them. Olivia's transformation from an invisible employee into a powerful voice against injustice shows that heroes aren't born ready. They're forged in life's most difficult situations. She wasn't special for having superpowers or extraordinary resources, but for having something many people have lost: the capacity to be outraged by injustice and the courage to act even when everything seemed to be against her. Her victory wasn't just personal, but collective. She opened the way for other people to also have the courage to denounce irregularities and fight for their rights. This story shows that the most dangerous secrets always find a way to come to light, and that truth, however hard it may be, is always more powerful than lies. If this narrative touched your heart and made you reflect on the importance of courage and honesty, share this video with someone who also needs that inspiration. Give it a like if you believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that show the transformative power of human courage. Sometimes the right story arrives exactly when we need it to remind us that it's worth fighting for what is right.